instead. So my new plan moving forward for the new year is to try and do a video every 2 months from Jam. Yeah, that's my bad. And we are back. Obviously a bit of a delay on this one. I thought I could keep up the momentum on this project continuously for a year with starting a new job and everything else that's been going on in my life, and it turns out that I can't. And the lesson is that's okay. I've come to terms recently that if I'm on the same project for too long, I need to step away. Be it music or writing or games or anything. So moving forward, I'm going to be giving myself permission to jump between projects as the inspiration hits. And I can afford to do that because this isn't my job. It's just something I do for fun, so fight me. I heard this saying that creative output is like exhaling, you know? Eventually you need to stop and breathe in. And for me that seems to come in at around 6-month chunks. So next time you feel guilty for not wanting to work on that thing you love, remember I said it's okay. Don't be afraid to put a project down if it's not working for you and come back to it later when you're fresh. Or don't. I am not your boss. So, like a nerdy Santa, I am back, yes, and I have got presents. Well, kind of. I imagine some of you would expect to see great leaps and bounds since the last video, since, it's been 6 months, surely you worked on the... No, I haven't. I haven't been working on the project at all. Sorry. However, what dragged me back is that I've had the pieces of an idea knocking around in my head for a few months, and recently something of a revelation as to how the whole choices impact the world and time continues after you die and you see the changes in game thing will work. So I wanted to make a video about that. Remember in The Lord of the Rings when Sam fights Shelob and he's sort of just like, damn, that's a big spider. Here I go being awesome again. And Sam and the movie viewers are like, just didn't really think much of it. But then you dive into the books and the lore and you learn who Shelob's mother was and what she did. And that there's a metric ton of information and events leading to that moment. And because of the deep lore and the world building that surrounds the characters, it suddenly becomes way more impactful. I want to do that. So bear with me. Say you're playing this game, and you come across a monster in a cave somewhere, and it's massive and terrifying, but you notice that the monster is a bit worse for wear. It has all these scars across its body, a leg that's missing, and there's a rusty sword lodged firmly in its back. And say instead of just trying to fight it, maybe you could ask around about the monster. You hear tell of a town in the north that was perhaps plagued by a monster of similar description years ago. You sail up there in your trusty little boat, and you ask around some more. You discover that a famous hero once clashed with that monster in that very town, wounding it greatly and causing it to flee from the area. The monster then retreated to lick its wounds, only to reappear in the south some 50 years later. Your monster. So you ask about the hero, and you find that they too were wounded, and they were forced to retire, settling down on a farm nearby to raise a family, and now, on the trail of the same creature that they fought, you track them down, and you visit them, and they offer you wisdom. Maybe that rusty blade you saw isn't just made of steel. Maybe he has a spare. Maybe he doesn't, but he knows the family who first forged it, and maybe they're still in business. Or maybe with the right set of tools, you could snatch the blade from the creature's back and use it to finish the job. Now, what if none of that was pre-scripted, but it instead was created dynamically through simulation? Introducing Archivist, the automatic real-time creation of historical information, visuals, and interwoven stories tool. Disclaimer, I'm well aware that systems of this already exist, I just really like acronyms. Spoken authorized by the Australian Government, Sean. Archivist is a procedural world-building and historical lore generation tool that creates different classes of entities and populates them throughout the world. These entities dynamically take in information about the world around them and undergo simulated life events, which directly impact the formation of the world around them, the lore, and the interactions for the player. At its core, this system is heavily inspired by the Caves of Qud narrative generation system. They have amazing GDC talks on how theirs works. Now, while there's naturally a lot of overlap, the system for Vicious Legacy will take what they've started and run with it to probably an unnecessary extreme. In the GDC talks, they explain that their event system is fundamentally random, but what it does is take reference from other existing elements such as faction relations or geographical location and weave that into the flavor text of each event. And since humans are really good at pattern recognition, players can infer a kind of cause and effect, right? They see two different things that share the same information. They see the guy from the ice place who hates cats that goes to war against cats using ice weapons. And this makes sense. And that's awesome. There's no real connection, but it's using the same information, so we can sort of fill in the blanks. And as they say in their talk, the history and narrative generation is a tertiary element to their game, so it does all that they need it to do. What I'll be doing with my system is taking it a step further. I want to generate the cause and effect that the players infer in Caves of Qud. Rather than being random coincidences, events will be triggered directly by the entity's traits, actions, skills, previous events, and all kinds of reasons. Events will have preconditions and multiple outcomes. They will have multiple parts, beginning, middle, and end, so there can be variation even within set events that happen more than once. The events then, in turn, affect the skills and traits of the entity who triggered them. As in life, we are shaped by our experiences. I believe this deeper layer of generation will not only ground the system, but create a clear narrative follow-through for the player. Players won't need to imagine what might have happened or why, because it'll be right there for them, waiting to be discovered, just like in real life. Why was this person in this place when this thing happened? Why was their blade named what it was, and how did they come to possess it? Why did they disappear before old age, and are they maybe still out there? These are the questions to the answers that come from the telling of each character's stories. These narrative through lines will be used to create a dynamic quest system that will become the heart of Vicious Legacy's gameplay. There won't be preset quests for the player to stumble upon. There is living, breathing history, and players piece together the quest by finding out information. By being part of history themselves, player actions become the next event in the history of whatever they interact with. And those actions continue on like ripples, becoming great waves, or becoming nothing. That's the beauty. The way this works is that I need to first be able to generate the entities themselves, with all their modular traits, which I'll group together and call modifiers. Then I will create an event system, which will simulate the lifespan of the entity, and draw them into different events with other entities, creating these narrative threads where different entities can interact. The modifiers that each entity holds will act as keys for certain events. Once the right conditions are met, the event is triggered. Different entities' actions within events throughout their lives are stored as memories, which are then drawn on to create dynamic quests and story beats. Here's the thing, entities aren't just humans or monsters either. Entities are anything that the player can interact with. A sword is an entity, just like some muddy old boot is, but they are classified further between basic and simple dynamic and complex dynamic entities, which each essentially describes their ability to change over time. A table is a basic entity. It probably won't go on any adventures. A background farmer NPC is a simple dynamic entity. It might change based on their surroundings, becoming maybe richer or poorer based on the economic state of where they live, but they probably won't go on any grand adventures either. But a prince, born into a royal family who is then overthrown, they will lead complex and dynamic lives. But that being said, they're not fixed in their roles. A sword might start out basic, but be used to kill a famous enemy, thus granting it fame and notoriety and thrusting it into the world of dynamic entities. The sword now has a name and a reputation and probably is worth a lot more. The key here is that the player is also an entity, creating and being involved in events of their own. Once a player is killed, retires, or goes insane, the timeline of the world and the entities within will continue to be generated as it was at the start, for a number of years until the next player character is ready to set out into the world and interact with the consequences of their previous actions. Like anything with game development, there's probably more than one way to go about something. The way I've chosen to start the system is by decoupling the data as much as possible from the logic and breaking it down into smaller, modular chunks that I can then reassemble. That way, if I need to reroll an entity's personality traits, I don't need to reroll the whole data set because those traits will be separated out into their own classes. I spent about a week drafting this out so far, so it's early days, but concretely, here's what I've done. I've created scriptable objects to use as templates for these datasets. I've got entity data, which is used to create the base blueprint for set types of entities, and currently a handful of modifiers. Out of these modifiers, I have reputations, which are very bare bones. As an entity interacts with other entities, they'll be given a reputation, which affects their stats and encounters. People who run from combat might be considered a coward, or someone who is always eager to help out a friend might be considered trustworthy and reliable. Certain events will look for certain reputations before triggering, so it's all logical. I don't have a stats system in place for entities, so for now I leave this blank, but I assign a type based on if the reputation is positive, negative, or neutral, and probably some other types that I'll get to. I then have professions as a modifier, which handle effectively the class of the entity, if they're human and have classes that is, and data associated with that. This ties into the decoupling I mentioned before, as well as the types of entities. Instead of creating a data set for a human farmer, a human trader, a human adventurer, and so on, I have a data set for different kinds of humans. Then I assign a profession at runtime which affects their stats and behavior. That way, for example, if you have a humble farmer and they have their family eaten by a monster and they end up setting out on a bloodthirsty revenge mission to hunt the monster down, I don't need to create a new entity. I can just change their profession and keep everything else the same. Professions will then also store different descriptions based on the reputation of the entity. So a trader might be well liked and talked about because they have a reputation for being generous and fair, or they might be hated for selling faulty goods and as a result are shunned from town. Right now this is just a description, it doesn't affect anything, but it's just a small example of how interlinking these different modifiers can dynamically change the data of an entity. And that's it for the scriptable objects for now. Then I have a base entity class itself, which holds the logic and information that all entities will need, and then I've further derived this class into human entity, though there will be many more, sword, table, monster, whatever. By deriving the class further, I can add specialized data without causing different entities to have to sift through unnecessary data to find what's relevant. This again is pretty bare bones for now, but it's initialized and fed data sets from the different scriptable object categories I mentioned before, which are picked randomly. Then it gets the data from those templates and uses it to do stuff. Currently, all it does is get the information together and spits out a bio for me in the console, which looks something like this. Hey, it's baby steps. But already, I hope you can kind of see how the reputation type is affecting the profession's description, and that this can sort of create more varied characters. Everything is trying to minimize repeated information as much as possible to create novel outputs, so the more information and data sets I can put in, the more varied the output will be. And that's pretty much it. Procedural human entities with a fairly minimal setup. The idea is that I can create new data sets as needed for personality traits, learned skills, permanent injuries, whatever else I want, and just keep adding it to the mix. My general methodology for this system is to combine simple ideas in complex ways. When you break it down, it's not that scary. Just quickly, I also wrote a text replacement system, which I'll be talking about in part 2, along with the event system itself. This means that when I'm writing text, I can put different symbols in for data, like pronouns, names, professions, different verbs, and the system will fill in the correct data and conjugation for me at the time, which is pretty neat. Whew, that was a lot of talking. And we've barely scratched the surface of this system. For final thoughts, I've already talked a lot, but I'm super excited to be back making these and so keen to see the system in action. I'll be releasing part 2 in July, and then I'm back off again to Europe in August, so I'll be gone again. As I mentioned, I'm bouncing around different projects though, so if you'd like to see some of that on this channel, maybe let me know, otherwise I could create like a parallel channel or something. I'm also thinking of doing some short form content on this channel, like lazy Blender tutorials, but for Unity, for any Inhubert fans among you. We'll see. Also, I've had it come up a couple of times where people have asked me if there's any way that they can directly support the game or the videos or anything like a Patreon, and I haven't really thought about it, but that might be something that I look at setting up from the next video onwards. Let me know what you think. But in the meantime, have a good one, and I will see you in the next one.